The Astropaths stand as one of humanity's most essential yet tragic necessities in the 41st millennium. These blind seers form the psychic backbone of Imperial communication, their lives forever altered by a ritual that connects them directly to the God Emperor of mankind himself. Without them, the Imperium would fracture into a million isolated worlds, each ignorant of threats and unable to coordinate defense or governance across the incomprehensible distances of the galaxy. Every astropath begins as a psyker, an individual cursed or blessed with the ability to touch the warp and manipulate its energies. Unlike the countless rogue psykers who fall to demonic possession or lose themselves to madness, astropaths survive their dangerous gift through the soul-binding ritual performed in the Emperor's presence on Holy Terra. This ancient ceremony, conducted in the depths of the Imperial Palace, creates a permanent psychic link between the psyker and the master of mankind. The process involves the Emperor's consciousness touching that of the supplicant, burning away weakness and forging a connection that acts as both anchor and shield against the predations of chaos. The soul binding exacts a terrible price. The overwhelming psychic presence of the Emperor, even filtered and controlled through the ritual, proves too much for mortal flesh to withstand. The supplicant's eyes burn out in the process, the physical organs destroyed by the sheer magnitude of the Emperor's power flowing through them. Some accounts describe smoke rising from empty sockets, while others speak of eyes that simply cease to function, becoming milky white orbs that see nothing of the material realm. The pain is said to be indescribable, a searing agony that marks the psyker forever. Yet what they lose in physical sight, they gain in witch sight, the ability to perceive the world through psychic senses that reveal truths hidden from normal vision. This blindness serves a purpose beyond mere sacrifice. The witch sight granted by soul binding allows astropaths to perceive the warp's currents and eddies, to sense the presence of other psykers, and to detect the taint of chaos in ways that sighted individuals cannot. They see the world as patterns of psychic energy, auras of emotion and intent, the bright flames of living souls against the backdrop of reality. An astropath can identify a person by the unique signature of their presence in the warp, can sense danger before it manifests, and can navigate the treacherous realm of psychic communication with practiced skill. The soul binding's most crucial benefit lies in its protection against demonic possession. The connection to the Emperor acts as a ward, making it extraordinarily difficult for warp entities to take hold of an astropath's mind and body. Where unsanctioned psykers remain vulnerable to corruption, their souls like beacons in the dark that draw predators from the Imperium, soul-bound astropaths possess a measure of safety. The Emperor's mark upon their soul repels lesser demons and provides resistance against even greater threats. This protection is not absolute, and astropaths who venture too deep into the warp or who weaken their defenses through exhaustion or despair can still fall, but the risk remains significantly lower than for other psykers. The Imperium's need for faster-than-light communication makes astropaths indispensable. Conventional Vox transmissions travel at the speed of light, making real-time communication across interstellar distances impossible. A message sent via standard methods from one side of a sector to another might take decades or centuries to arrive, rendering it useless for coordination of military campaigns, governance decisions, or warnings of impending threats. The galaxy's sheer scale transforms simple communication into an insurmountable obstacle without psychic means. Astropaths solve this problem through telepathic transmission across the warp. By projecting their consciousness into the Imperium, they can send messages that traverse vast distances in a fraction of the time physical signals would require. The process involves encoding information into psychic patterns, thoughts and impressions shaped into coherent messages that another astropath can receive and interpret. A skilled astropath can transmit detailed reports, strategic intelligence, or urgent warnings across hundreds or even thousands of light years, though the accuracy and clarity of such messages degrades with distance and the turbulent nature of the warp itself. The transmission process demands intense concentration and carries inherent risks. The astropath must enter a trance state, opening their mind to the warp while maintaining the psychic shields that protect them from its dangers. They shape their message carefully, stripping away ambiguity and focusing on core information, as the warp distorts and corrupts data passing through it. Metaphor and symbolism often prove more reliable than literal details, leading to the development of complex psychic languages and symbolic frameworks that astropaths learn during their training. A message about an orc invasion might be transmitted as impressions of green-skinned brutality, crude weapons, and overwhelming numbers, which the receiving astropath must then translate back into actionable intelligence. Reception proves equally challenging. Astropaths maintain a constant psychic vigil, their minds attuned to incoming transmissions from across the void. They filter through the background noise of the warp, the screaming of demons, the psychic death cries of distant worlds, and the incomprehensible whispers of things that should not exist. Identifying legitimate messages among this chaos requires years of experience and iron discipline. Once detected, the receiving astropath must interpret the psychic impressions, translating symbolic content back into concrete information while accounting for distortions introduced during transmission. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica holds absolute authority over all astropaths throughout the Imperium. This organization, one of the most powerful branches of the Adeptus Terra, manages every aspect of psychic communication and sanctioning. Their responsibilities encompass identifying potential psykers among the Imperium's population, transporting them to Terra aboard the infamous Black Ships, training those who prove suitable, conducting the soul-binding ritual, and assigning qualified astropaths to posts across the galaxy. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica maintains facilities on Terra and throughout the Imperium, including training scholams, testing centers, and relay stations that coordinate the vast network of psychic communication. The organization's structure reflects its galaxy-spanning mandate. At its apex sits the master of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, one of the High Lords of Terra who speaks with authority second only to the Emperor himself in matters concerning sanctioned psykers. Beneath this position exists a complex hierarchy of administrators, trainers, and senior astropaths who manage recruitment, training curricula, assignment protocols, and quality control. Regional offices coordinate operations within specific sectors, ensuring adequate coverage and responding to requests for additional astropaths from military commanders, planetary governors, and other imperial authorities. Recruitment begins with the Black Ships, sinister vessels that travel established routes throughout the Imperium collecting psykers identified by local authorities or the Adeptus Arbites. These ships transport their cargo back to Terra in conditions that vary from merely uncomfortable to actively hostile, as guards remain constantly vigilant for signs of possession or corruption among their charges. Many psykers die during the journey, succumbing to despair, attempting escape, or falling to the very demonic influences the Imperium fears. Those who survive arrive at Terra for testing and evaluation. The testing process separates wheat from chaff with brutal efficiency. Examiners assess each psyker's strength, control, resistance to corruption, and aptitude for specific disciplines. The weakest are tithed to the Golden Throne, their life force consumed to sustain the Emperor's psychic beacon, the Astronomicon, that guides ships through the warp. Those with moderate strength but insufficient control face similar fates or assignment to other roles where their limited abilities prove useful. Only psykers demonstrating both significant power and the mental discipline necessary to withstand soul binding proceed to astropath training. Training for prospective astropaths spans years and pushes candidates to their absolute limits. They learn to control their abilities with precision, to construct and maintain psychic shields, to enter and exit trance states safely, and to perceive and interpret the symbolic language of warp-based communication. Instructors drill students in meditation techniques, mental disciplines, and the theological framework that helps them understand their relationship with the Emperor. Physical training receives less emphasis, though candidates must maintain sufficient health to survive the soul-binding ritual. Many fail during training, their minds breaking under the strain or their control proving insufficient for the demands placed upon them. Those who complete training face the soul binding itself. The ritual takes place in specially prepared chambers deep within the Imperial Palace, locations saturated with centuries of psychic energy and protected by the most powerful wards the Imperium can devise. Candidates approach the ritual with a mixture of fear, reverence, and resignation, knowing that success means a lifetime of service while failure likely means death. The ceremony's details remain closely guarded secrets, known only to those who have experienced it and the adepts who facilitate the process, but its effects are unmistakable. Astropaths occupy a unique position among sanctioned psykers in Imperial service. Where Primaris psykers attached to military forces specialize in combat applications of their abilities, and where navigators focus exclusively on guiding ships through the warp, astropaths concentrate on communication and information transfer. Their training emphasizes telepathy above all other psychic disciplines, though most retain some ability in divination and psychic perception. This specialization makes them less versatile than other sanctioned psykers, but far more effective at their designated role. Their relationship with the Emperor sets astropaths apart from other Imperial servants. The soul binding creates a connection that remains active throughout their lives, a constant awareness of the Emperor's distant presence that provides comfort and strength. Many astropaths describe this connection as a warm light in the darkness of the warp, a guiding star that helps them navigate the Imperium's treacherous currents. This bond reinforces their loyalty and provides psychological stability in the face of the horrors they regularly encounter. Some astropaths claim to receive visions or impressions directly from the Emperor, though whether these represent genuine communication or simply their own minds interpreting the psychic connection remains a matter of theological debate. The protected status astropaths enjoy contrasts sharply with the Imperium's general treatment of psykers. Where unsanctioned witches face execution, imprisonment, or worse, astropaths receive respect and legal protection. Imperial law recognizes their essential nature and grants them privileges unavailable to most citizens. They can travel freely throughout the Imperium, requisition resources necessary for their work, and expect cooperation from local authorities. This protection extends to physical security as well, with severe penalties mandated for anyone who harms or interferes with an astropath in the performance of their duties. Despite this official protection, astropaths rarely escape the suspicion and fear that Imperial citizens direct toward all psykers. Common people view them with unease, avoiding direct contact and making protective signs when astropaths pass. Even among the educated and powerful, wariness persists, a recognition that these blind seers wield powers that could destroy as easily as communicate. Astropaths learn to accept this isolation as part of their burden, understanding that their service to the Imperium requires sacrifice beyond the loss of their sight. Assignment protocols distribute astropaths according to strategic necessity and operational requirements. Major hubs like sector capitals, forge worlds, and naval bases receive multiple astropaths to handle high communication volumes. Important but less critical locations might host a single astropath or share one among several nearby worlds. The most remote or insignificant planets may go without permanent astropath presence, relying instead on periodic visits from itinerant telepaths or messages relayed through nearby systems. Military forces operating away from established infrastructure often include astropaths in their command structure, ensuring commanders can maintain contact with higher authority and coordinate with other Imperial forces. The League of Black Ships, formerly designated as the Divisio Astra Telepathica, operates the most feared fleet in the Imperium. These vessels serve a single purpose: collecting the psychic tithe demanded from every world under Imperial rule. The organization maintains thousands of these ships, each painted in the traditional black livery that has given them their ominous name. Their hulls bear no decoration beyond the aquila and the sigils of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, presenting a deliberately intimidating appearance that announces their purpose to any who see them approach. Black ships follow predetermined routes through Imperial space, visiting worlds on schedules that might span decades or centuries depending on a planet's location and population. These routes account for warp travel unpredictability, strategic importance of different regions, and the estimated psychic population of worlds along each path. A densely populated hive world might receive annual visits, while a frontier agri-world with scattered settlements might see a black ship only once per century. The Divisio Astra Telepathica maintains detailed records of these routes, adjusting them based on changing conditions, newly discovered psychic populations, and reports of increased manifestations in specific regions. Local authorities bear responsibility for identifying and detaining psykers between black ship visits. Planetary governors, Arbites enforcers, and ecclesiarchy officials work together to locate individuals displaying psychic abilities. The methods vary wildly across the Imperium's diverse cultures. Some worlds maintain sophisticated testing programs that screen children at regular intervals, using sanctioned psykers or specialized equipment to detect latent abilities before they manifest dangerously. Others rely on informants, encouraging citizens to report neighbors or family members who exhibit suspicious behavior. The most primitive societies might identify psykers through superstition and witch hunting, though these methods often result in false accusations alongside legitimate identifications. The process of surrendering psykers to the black ships follows established imperial protocol, though implementation differs based on local customs and resources. Wealthy core worlds maintain secure facilities where identified psykers await collection, housed in cells equipped with null field generators or other suppression technology. These individuals receive basic care and sometimes even education about their impending journey to Terra, though such kindness remains rare. Poorer worlds might simply chain suspected psykers in regular prisons or hand them over to local Arbites for holding. The most desperate or ignorant populations occasionally attempt to hide their psykers, whether from misguided compassion or fear of losing valuable individuals, but such defiance invariably brings severe consequences when discovered. Not all psykers go willingly. Families resist surrendering children they love, despite the danger those children represent. Powerful individuals with psychic abilities sometimes use their gifts to avoid detection or resist capture, requiring specialized suppression teams to subdue them. Entire communities on isolated worlds have been known to protect their witches, viewing them as valuable assets or religious figures rather than threats. The Divisio Astra Telepathica maintains enforcement arms specifically trained to handle such resistance. These operatives employ null maidens, warriors with the pariah gene whose presence disrupts psychic powers, alongside conventional military force when necessary. Worlds that consistently fail to meet their psychic tithe face investigation and potential sanction, up to and including military intervention. Once collected, psykers board the black ships for the journey to Terra. The conditions aboard these vessels reflect their cargo's dangerous nature. Most psykers spend the voyage in null chambers, specialized holding areas lined with psychically inert materials and equipped with suppression field generators. These chambers prevent psykers from accessing their abilities, reducing the risk of possession or psychic incidents that could endanger the ship. The null fields create an uncomfortable sensation for those confined within them, a feeling of emptiness and disconnection that many describe as worse than physical pain. Stronger psykers require additional restraint through psi shackles, devices that bind their connection to the warp through a combination of physical restraint and psychic suppression technology. The ship's telepathica staff begins evaluation during the voyage. These sanctioned psykers and trained officials conduct initial assessments of each captive's strength, stability, and potential. They observe how psykers react to suppression, noting those who maintain composure versus those who descend into panic or madness. Interviews attempt to gauge mental resilience, educational background, and willingness to serve the Imperium. Physical examinations check for signs of mutation, corruption, or genetic abnormalities that might indicate warp exposure or demonic taint. This preliminary screening allows staff to categorize psykers before arrival at Terra, streamlining the more intensive testing that awaits them. The testing process employs both psychic and technological methods. Sanctioned psykers probe the minds of captives, assessing the depth and nature of their connection to the warp. They look for specific talents, whether the subject shows aptitude for telepathy, divination, telekinesis, or other disciplines. Strength ratings follow established scales, measuring raw power from the barely noticeable to the potentially catastrophic. Stability testing proves equally important, as a powerful but unstable psyker poses greater danger than a weak but controlled one. Equipment measures psychic emanations, brain activity patterns, and responses to controlled warp exposure, providing objective data to supplement subjective assessments. Classification determines fate. The Telepathica staff sorts psykers into categories based on their assessment results. The strongest and most stable represent potential candidates for astropath training or other prestigious roles. Those with moderate power but excellent control might serve as primaris psykers for military units, sanctioned diviners for imperial institutions, or specialists in various psychic disciplines. Individuals showing specific rare talents receive special attention, as certain abilities prove particularly valuable to imperial operations. The classification system accounts for dozens of factors, creating detailed profiles that guide subsequent decisions about each psyker's ultimate purpose. The weakest psykers and those deemed too unstable or dangerous for training face grimmer destinies. Many join the psychic choir that powers the Astronomicon, the Emperor's great beacon that guides ships through the warp. This massive psychic engine requires constant fuel in the form of psyker souls. Thousands of these unfortunate individuals sit in vast amphitheaters surrounding the device, their life force slowly drained to maintain the beacon's strength. The process takes months or even years, during which the psykers remain conscious but increasingly diminished, their minds and bodies withering as their essence feeds the Astronomicon. Death comes as a mercy when their reserves finally exhaust, though by that point little remains of the person they once were. Others go directly to the Golden Throne itself. The Emperor's life support system demands constant psychic sustenance, consuming souls to maintain the barriers that prevent his final death and the catastrophic warp breach that would follow. These psykers face immediate consumption, their life force added to the countless others that have sustained the master of mankind for 10,000 years. The process is instantaneous and absolute, leaving nothing behind. Imperial doctrine presents this fate as the highest honor, a direct service to the Emperor himself, though the psykers selected for it rarely view their sacrifice so positively. Some psykers prove too corrupted or dangerous even for these purposes. Those showing signs of demonic taint, uncontrolled mutation, or psychic abilities that defy safe containment face execution. The methods vary but typically involve psychic nullification followed by physical destruction, ensuring that nothing remains that could serve as a gateway for warp entities. The bodies are usually incinerated, with the ashes scattered or disposed of according to strict protocols designed to prevent any posthumous manifestation of their powers. The scale of the psychic tithe staggers comprehension. Estimates suggest that millions of psykers are collected annually across the Imperium, though precise numbers remain impossible to verify given the galaxy's size and the Administratum's notorious record-keeping inconsistencies. Some sectors report steadily increasing numbers of psychic manifestations, supporting theories that humanity's evolution toward becoming a fully psychic species continues to accelerate. Others show stable or even declining rates, though whether this reflects genuine demographic trends or simply inadequate detection and reporting remains unclear. The Divisio Astra Telepathica struggles to maintain sufficient black ships to meet demand. Construction of these specialized vessels requires significant resources and time, while their crews need extensive training in handling psychic prisoners and operating suppression equipment. Losses to warp storms, Xenos attacks, and the occasional catastrophic psychic incident aboard ship create constant pressure to replace vessels and personnel. Some regions of the Imperium suffer from inadequate coverage, with black ships unable to visit frequently enough to collect all identified psykers. These gaps result in dangerous accumulations of unsanctioned psykers on isolated worlds, creating situations that sometimes explode into witch cults, demonic incursions, or psychic plagues. The increasing rate of psyker births compounds these logistical challenges. Reports from across the Imperium document rising numbers of children manifesting psychic abilities, sometimes at younger ages than historically typical. Certain bloodlines show particularly high incidence rates, leading to debates about whether genetic factors concentrate psychic potential or whether environmental conditions trigger latent abilities. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica monitors these trends carefully, adjusting collection routes and increasing black ship deployments to regions showing significant increases. The organization's leadership recognizes that failure to collect and sanction psykers quickly enough could result in cascading disasters as unsanctioned witches proliferate beyond the Imperium's ability to contain them. The journey from collection to final assignment can take years. A psyker collected from a frontier world might spend months aboard a black ship as it completes its route, then additional months in holding facilities on Terra awaiting testing and classification. Those selected for Astropath training face years of instruction before soul binding, followed by recovery and final assignment. Even psykers destined for the Astronomicon or Golden Throne might wait extended periods in holding, as the logistics of processing millions of individuals through centralized facilities on Terra create inevitable bottlenecks. During these delays, psykers remain in suppression, their abilities locked away, and their lives suspended in an uncomfortable limbo between collection and purpose. The Forbidden Fortress rises from the Himalayan mountains like a monument to humanity's psychic ambitions and necessities. This massive complex serves as the primary headquarters of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, a sprawling installation that has occupied these ancient peaks for 10,000 years. The fortress earns its name from the absolute restrictions placed on unauthorized access. Only sanctioned psykers, senior telepathica officials, and those with explicit permission from the highest levels of Imperial authority may enter its gates. Even among these privileged few, vast sections remain off-limits, their purposes known only to the most senior adepts and the master of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica himself. The fortress's architecture reflects both its age and its function. Massive walls constructed from psychically resonant materials rise hundreds of meters from the mountain rock, their surfaces inscribed with protective wards and hexagrammic symbols that have been renewed and reinforced countless times over the millennia. Guard towers equipped with both conventional weaponry and psychic dampening equipment watch all approaches. The main gates, fashioned from adamantium and blessed by generations of tech priests, stand perpetually sealed except when opening to admit new arrivals or allow departures. Within these outer defenses, the fortress spreads across multiple levels carved into the mountain itself, with some sections extending deep underground, while others climb toward the peaks in towers that scrape the thin atmosphere. The soul binding chambers occupy the fortress's deepest levels, positioned as close to the Imperial Palace as the mountain's geography permits. These ancient halls have witnessed millions of rituals over 10 millennia, their walls saturated with residual psychic energy from countless ceremonies. Each chamber features a central dais where the supplicant kneels, surrounded by concentric circles of protective runes and psychic dampening fields. The chambers maintain constant temperature and humidity regardless of external conditions, preserved by ancient environmental systems that have required only minimal maintenance despite their age. Lighting comes from luminescent panels set into the ceiling, providing steady illumination without the flicker or variation that might disturb the delicate psychic work performed within these spaces. Senior astropaths conduct the soul-binding rituals, serving as intermediaries between the supplicants and the Emperor's overwhelming presence. These facilitators have performed the ceremony hundreds or thousands of times, their experience allowing them to guide candidates through the process while monitoring for complications. The ritual follows precise protocols established during the Great Crusade and refined over subsequent millennia. Preparation involves days of fasting, meditation, and psychic conditioning designed to strengthen the candidate's mind and spirit. The ceremony itself requires the supplicant to open their consciousness fully, dropping all psychic defenses and allowing the Emperor's presence to flow through the connection established by the facilitating astropaths. The moment of contact brings the characteristic burning of the eyes, the searing pain that marks every successful soul binding, and the fundamental transformation from unsanctioned psyker to servant of the Imperium. Recovery chambers adjacent to the soul binding halls house newly bound astropaths during the critical period following their transformation. The experience leaves candidates physically and psychically exhausted, their bodies struggling to adapt to the loss of physical sight and the overwhelming new sensory input of which sight. Medical staff monitor vital signs and provide pain management, though the deeper wounds inflicted by the ritual resist conventional treatment. Psychic healers work to stabilize the new Astropath's connection to the warp, ensuring that the soul binding has taken properly and that no complications threaten their survival. This recovery period typically lasts several weeks, during which the new Astropaths begin learning to navigate their changed perception of reality. The Scholastica Psychana facilities occupy the fortress's mid-levels, comprising dozens of training halls, meditation chambers, and practice rooms where prospective Astropaths spend years mastering their craft. The curriculum begins with fundamental psychic control, teaching students to access their powers reliably while maintaining the mental discipline necessary to avoid corruption. Instructors, themselves veteran Astropaths or other sanctioned psykers, guide students through progressively more challenging exercises. Early training focuses on simple tasks like moving small objects through telekinesis or sensing the emotional states of others through basic telepathy. As students advance, the exercises grow more complex and demanding. Telepathic transmission forms the core of Astropath training. Students learn to encode information into psychic patterns, stripping away unnecessary details and focusing on essential content that can survive transmission through the warp. The process requires understanding how the Imperium distorts and corrupts data, which types of information translate most reliably, and how to construct messages that receiving Astropaths can accurately interpret. Training involves extensive practice with symbolic languages developed specifically for psychic communication, frameworks that use archetypal images, and concepts less vulnerable to warp distortion than literal descriptions. Students practice transmitting and receiving messages of increasing complexity, working first with partners in adjacent rooms, then across the fortress, and eventually attempting longer-range communications under instructor supervision. Warpcraft theory occupies substantial portions of the curriculum. Students study the nature of the Imperium, learning to recognize different types of warp phenomena and understanding the dangers each presents. Instructors explain how warp storms form and dissipate, how demonic entities manifest and operate, and how the Emperor's presence in the warp creates the protective connection that soul binding establishes. Theological instruction complements this technical knowledge, teaching students about the Emperor's nature, the Imperial Creed's relationship to psychic service, and the spiritual framework that helps Astropaths maintain faith and purpose throughout their careers. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica maintains extensive libraries within the Scholastica Psychana, containing texts on psychic theory, historical accounts of notable Astropaths, and detailed analyses of communication techniques refined over 10,000 years. Mental discipline training pushes students to their limits and beyond. Instructors subject candidates to controlled psychic attacks, testing their ability to maintain shields under pressure. Meditation exercises last for days, requiring students to maintain focus despite exhaustion, discomfort, and deliberate distractions. Students learn techniques for entering and exiting trance states quickly and safely, essential skills for Astropaths who must respond rapidly to incoming transmissions or abort dangerous communications when warp conditions deteriorate. The training includes exposure to recorded psychic phenomena, allowing students to experience sanitized versions of the horrors they will encounter in actual service. These exercises familiarize candidates with the sensation of demonic presence, the psychic screaming that pervades the warp, and the disorienting effects of warp storms, preparing them to maintain composure when facing such threats in reality. Physical conditioning receives less emphasis but remains part of the regimen. Students maintain basic health through regular exercise and controlled diets, ensuring their bodies can withstand the stresses of psychic work. The training includes instruction in using other senses to compensate for blindness, teaching students to navigate through hearing, touch, and psychic perception. Many students arrive at the Scholastica Psychana already possessing some psychic sight, but instructors refine these abilities, teaching efficient techniques for perceiving the material world through warp sense, rather than relying on the cruder methods most unsanctioned psykers develop instinctively. The Scholastica Psychona maintains a harsh attrition rate. Many students fail to develop sufficient control over their abilities, their minds unable to master the complex techniques required for reliable astropathic communication. Others break under the psychological pressure of constant training and the knowledge of what awaits them in the soul-binding ritual. Some succumb to corruption despite the protective environment, their minds touched by entities that slip through even the fortress's formidable defenses. The instructors show little sympathy for failure, understanding that an astropath who cannot meet the Scholastica's standards will certainly fail in actual service, potentially causing catastrophic communication failures or falling to possession when isolated on distant worlds. Failed students face reassignment to less demanding roles, or, if their failure indicates fundamental instability, consignment to the Astronomicon or immediate execution, depending on the nature and severity of their inadequacy. The chamber of the Astronomicon exists as a separate complex adjacent to the Forbidden Fortress, though administratively it falls under Adeptus Astra Telepathica oversight. This vast facility houses the psychic choir that maintains the Astronomicon, the Emperor's great beacon that guides Imperial vessels through the warp. The chamber itself defies easy description, a massive amphitheater arranged in concentric rings around the psychic machinery that focuses and amplifies the choir's output. 10,000 psykers sit in specialized thrones, their bodies connected to life support systems, and their minds linked together in a unified psychic construct. These individuals come from the same population collected by the Black Ships, psykers deemed unsuitable for astropath training, but possessing sufficient strength to contribute to the beacon. The choir members experience a slow death by degrees. Their connection to the Astronomicon machinery drains their life force continuously, channeling their psychic energy into the beacon that burns in the warp like a miniature star. The process takes months, during which the psykers remain conscious but increasingly diminished. Their bodies wither despite the life support system's best efforts, flesh shrinking against bones as their essence flows into the beacon. Their minds fragment gradually, thoughts becoming disjointed and memories fading as the machinery consumes everything that makes them individuals. By the end, little remains beyond a spark of consciousness tethered to a failing body, until finally even that gutters out and the throne's occupant expires. Servitors immediately remove the corpse and install a replacement, maintaining the choir's numbers through constant rotation. The sacrifice these psykers make enables the Imperium's existence. Without the Astronomicon, navigators could not guide ships safely through the warp across the vast distances that separate Imperial worlds. The beacon provides a fixed reference point visible throughout much of the galaxy, allowing navigators to plot courses and maintain orientation in the Imperium's chaotic environment. The light it produces burns with the Emperor's own psychic power, amplified and sustained by the choir's continuous sacrifice. Adeptus Astra Telepathica officials monitor the choir constantly, tracking each member's deterioration and scheduling replacements to ensure the beacon never falters. The logistics of maintaining this operation require processing thousands of new psykers monthly, a demand that drives much of the Black Ship's collection efforts. The Halls of Petition occupy a section of the Forbidden Fortress dedicated to administrative functions. Here, newly bound and trained astropaths receive their assignments, matching their capabilities with the Imperium's needs. Senior officials maintain detailed records of requests from across the galaxy, planetary governors seeking astropaths for their worlds, military commanders requiring psychic communications support, rogue traders petitioning for personal astropaths to accompany their expeditions, and countless other demands for telepathic services. The officials evaluate each request's legitimacy and priority, weighing strategic importance against available personnel. An astropath assigned to a Forge World's communications hub serves differently than one attached to a crusading fleet or stationed on a frontier outpost, and the Telepathica attempts to match individual strengths and temperaments to appropriate postings. The assignment process accounts for numerous factors beyond simple availability. Officials consider an astropath's power level, specialized training, psychological profile, and physical condition when determining suitable postings. Some assignments require exceptional strength to maintain communications across particularly vast distances or through regions of unstable warp conditions. Others need astropaths with specific secondary abilities, such as divination skills that complement their primary telepathic function. The officials also track performance records of previously assigned astropaths, noting which individuals excel in high-pressure military environments versus those better suited to civilian administrative roles. This careful matching helps ensure that the Imperium's psychic communication network operates as efficiently as possible given the limitations of available personnel. The Chambers of Purity provide essential security functions within the fortress complex. These facilities conduct regular testing of all astropaths passing through Terra, whether newly bound candidates, returning veterans, or those reassigned from previous postings. The examinations search for any sign of corruption, mutation, or compromised loyalty that might indicate warp taint or enemy infiltration. Sanctioned psykers probe the subjects' minds, looking for the subtle wrongness that accompanies demonic influence. Physical examinations check for mutations or stigmata that might have developed since the subject's last evaluation. The chambers maintain sophisticated equipment capable of detecting even trace amounts of warp corruption, devices that measure psychic emanations, and compare them against baseline readings established during the subject's initial soul binding. The testing proves uncomfortable and invasive, but astropaths accept it as necessary. They understand the catastrophic damage a corrupted astropath could inflict, using their position and abilities to transmit false information, coordinate enemy actions, or serve as a gateway for demonic incursion. The Chambers of Purity have uncovered numerous compromised individuals over the millennia, astropaths who fell to corruption during their service and attempted to hide their taint upon returning to Terra. Those discovered face immediate execution, their bodies destroyed completely to prevent any posthumous manifestation of whatever entities had claimed them. The Chamber's staff show no mercy in these cases, understanding that even a moment's hesitation could allow a demon to escape containment and wreak havoc within the fortress itself. The archives maintained within the Forbidden Fortress contain 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge about psychic communication. These vast repositories hold training manuals, technique guides, historical records of notable transmissions, analyses of warp phenomena, and countless other documents related to astropathic practice. Scribes and archivists, many themselves failed astropath candidates or retired telepaths no longer capable of active service, maintain these records with obsessive care. The information proves invaluable for training new generations of astropaths, refining existing techniques, and understanding long-term trends in warp behavior and psychic communication reliability. Researchers studying the archives have identified patterns in warp storm formation, developed improved encoding methods for psychic transmissions, and documented the effectiveness of various protective techniques against specific types of warp threats. The protocols contained within these archives standardize astropathic practice across the Imperium. Every astropath learns the same fundamental techniques, uses the same symbolic frameworks for encoding messages, and follows the same safety procedures when entering the warp. This standardization ensures that any astropath can communicate with any other regardless of where they trained or how long ago they completed their education. The protocols evolve gradually as new techniques prove their worth and old methods become obsolete, but changes occur slowly and deliberately to maintain compatibility across the vast network of astropaths serving throughout the galaxy. The preparation for soul binding begins weeks before the actual ceremony, a carefully orchestrated process designed to maximize each candidate's chance of survival. The Scholastica Psychana instructors identify students who have completed their training and demonstrated sufficient control to warrant attempting the ritual. These candidates undergo final testing that pushes them harder than any previous evaluation, their instructors seeking absolute confirmation that each individual possesses the mental fortitude and psychic discipline necessary to withstand direct contact with the Emperor's consciousness. The tests involve sustained psychic work under deliberately adverse conditions, forcing candidates to maintain complex telepathic transmissions while under psychic attack, or requiring them to hold their mental shield stable for days without rest. Those who falter at this stage receive additional training, or, if their failure indicates fundamental limitations, face reassignment to other roles. The candidates who pass proceed to the purification rites administered by the ecclesiarchy. Priests arrive at the Forbidden Fortress specifically to conduct these ceremonies, bringing with them holy oils consecrated in the most sacred shrines of Terra, blessed water drawn from ancient sources, and relics that have touched the lives of saints and martyrs. The purification spans 3 days of continuous ritual. The priests anoint each candidate's body with the sacred oils while reciting prayers of protection and devotion. They administer communion using wafers blessed by senior members of the ecclesiarchy, symbolic consumption of the emperor's grace, meant to strengthen the candidate's soul against the ordeal ahead. The candidates bathe in the blessed water while priests chant hymns that have accompanied soul-binding ceremonies for thousands of years. Throughout these rites, the candidates maintain silence, their minds focused on meditation and prayer rather than conversation or distraction. The psychological conditioning that accompanies physical purification proves equally intensive. Senior astropaths who will facilitate the actual ritual meet with candidates individually, explaining in detail what they will experience. These veterans describe the sensation of the Emperor's presence, the overwhelming magnitude of his psychic power, and the pain that accompanies the burning away of physical sight. They teach specific mental techniques for enduring the experience, methods for anchoring consciousness when reality seems to dissolve, and ways to maintain identity when touched by a being whose existence spans dimensions beyond mortal comprehension. The facilitators emphasize that survival depends on absolute surrender combined with iron will, a paradox that candidates must internalize. They must open themselves completely to the Emperor's presence, while simultaneously maintaining enough sense of self to avoid dissolution into his vastness. The candidates spend their final night before soul binding in meditation cells deep within the fortress. These small chambers contain nothing beyond a simple sleeping mat and a single candle, their walls inscribed with protective wards that create an atmosphere of profound stillness. Most candidates sleep poorly, if at all, their minds racing with anticipation and fear despite their training. Some pray continuously, seeking strength from faith in the Emperor. Others review their mental disciplines obsessively, practicing the techniques they will need during the ritual. A few achieve genuine calm, their years of training allowing them to face the approaching ordeal with acceptance rather than dread. Regardless of their emotional state, all candidates emerge from their meditation cells at the appointed hour, summoned by servitors who guide them toward the soul-binding chambers. The journey to the chambers follows a processional route used for 10 millennia. The candidates walk in single file, each accompanied by a facilitating astropath who will guide them through the ritual. The corridors they traverse grow progressively older as they descend, the architecture shifting from the relatively modern upper levels to passages that date back to the fortress's founding during the Great Crusade. The walls display frescoes depicting previous generations of astropaths in service to the Imperium, images of blind seers transmitting vital intelligence, warning of Xeno's invasions, or coordinating Imperial responses to emerging threats. These artworks serve as reminders of the purpose awaiting those who survive, the vital role they will play in humanity's continued existence. The soul-binding chambers themselves inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Each candidate enters a separate chamber, the facilitating astropath sealing the door behind them with psychic wards that prevent any external interference. The chamber's central dais rises from the floor, its surface worn smooth by the countless psykers who have knelt there before. Concentric circles of hexagrammic symbols surround the dais, their lines carved deep into the stone and filled with silver that gleams in the steady light from above. The air feels thick with accumulated psychic energy, the residue of millions of rituals creating an atmosphere that presses against the candidate's senses. Every surface bears protective runes, layer upon layer of warding added over millennia by the most skilled psychic artificers the Imperium has produced. These protections serve dual purposes, containing the massive psychic energies involved in the ritual while shielding the candidate from the full unfiltered force of the Emperor's presence. The candidate kneels on the dais, while the facilitating astropath takes position at the chamber's edge. The ritual begins with the facilitator entering a deep trance, their consciousness reaching out toward the imperial palace and the golden throne that houses the Emperor's physical form. The astropath's witch sight perceives the Emperor as a blazing star of psychic power, a presence so vast that even viewing it from a distance through psychic senses proves almost overwhelming. The facilitator establishes a carefully controlled connection, creating a psychic conduit between the Emperor and the waiting candidate. This connection requires extraordinary skill to maintain, as the facilitator must regulate the flow of power to prevent the candidate's immediate immolation while still allowing sufficient contact to achieve soul binding. The candidate feels the connection form as a sudden pressure against their consciousness, as though something impossibly vast has turned its attention toward them. The sensation builds rapidly, the Emperor's presence flowing through the conduit established by the facilitator. What begins as pressure transforms into overwhelming force, a psychic tsunami that crashes against the candidate's mind with power beyond anything they have experienced during training. The candidate's every instinct screams to raise shields, to protect themselves from this assault, but survival demands the opposite response. They must open themselves completely, dropping all defenses and allowing the Emperor's essence to flow through them unimpeded. Those who resist, who try to protect themselves from the onslaught, die instantly as the Emperor's power shatters their inadequate shields and burns through their consciousness like fire through parchment. The candidates who successfully surrender experience the Emperor's consciousness touching their own. The sensation defies description in conventional terms. Some later speak of feeling their individual identity dissolving into something infinitely greater, their personal thoughts and memories becoming insignificant specks within an ocean of awareness that spans the entire Imperium. Others describe perceiving the Emperor's constant struggle against the forces of chaos, feeling the weight of his eternal vigil and the sacrifice he makes to protect humanity. A few claim to receive visions during this contact, glimpses of the Emperor's intentions or impressions of threats facing the Imperium, though the accuracy of such experiences remains impossible to verify. What all survivors share is the fundamental transformation that occurs during this moment of contact, the forging of a permanent psychic link between their soul and the Emperor's own essence. The physical effects manifest simultaneously with the psychic transformation. The candidate's eyes burn as the Emperor's radiance flows through them, the delicate organs unable to withstand exposure to such overwhelming power. The process happens quickly, measured in seconds rather than minutes, but the pain extends far beyond its brief duration. Candidates describe the sensation as having molten metal poured directly into their eye sockets, a searing agony that overwhelms every other sensation. Smoke rises from some candidates' faces as the tissue literally combusts. Others experience a more gradual destruction, their eyes clouding and withering as the cells die en masse. The end result proves identical regardless of the specific mechanism. The candidate's physical sight dies completely and permanently, the eyes rendered non-functional by their exposure to power no mortal flesh was meant to perceive. Yet even as physical sight dies, witch sight awakens with unprecedented clarity. The newly soul-bound astropath perceives reality through psychic senses, enhanced and refined by their connection to the Emperor. They see the world as patterns of psychic energy, living beings appearing as flames of varying intensity and color, depending on their nature and emotional state. The warp itself becomes visible, its currents and eddies flowing through and around material reality like invisible rivers suddenly made apparent. Other psykers shine like beacons in this altered perception, their psychic signatures immediately identifiable. The astropath can sense demonic taint as a wrongness in the fabric of reality, a corruption that stands out against the natural flow of warp energy. This new sight requires time and practice to interpret effectively, but it provides information and awareness that physical eyes could never match. The psychological effects of soul binding cut deeper than the physical transformation. The experience of touching the Emperor's consciousness fundamentally changes every astropath's personality and perspective. The overwhelming nature of the contact leaves mental scarring that never fully heals. Many astropaths develop a detached quality, as though a part of them remains perpetually distant from immediate concerns, their thoughts drawn back to that moment of contact with something infinitely greater than themselves. Others become more devout, their faith in the Emperor transformed from abstract belief into absolute certainty born of direct experience. Some grow melancholic, burdened by awareness of the Emperor's suffering and the weight of his eternal vigil. The specific changes vary between individuals, but no astropath emerges from soul binding psychologically identical to the person who entered the chamber. The psychic mark left by soul binding proves visible to other psykers who examine an astropath carefully. This signature appears as a distinctive pattern in the astropath's psychic presence, a stamp of the Emperor's touch that identifies them unmistakably. The mark serves multiple functions beyond simple identification. It acts as the primary defense against demonic possession, the Emperor's essence woven into the astropath's soul-creating barriers that warp entities find extremely difficult to breach. Lesser demons cannot possess a soul-bound astropath at all, their attempts to enter the psyker's mind rebuffed by the Emperor's presence. Greater demons can potentially overcome this protection through sustained effort, or if the astropath's defenses weaken significantly, but even they find soul-bound psykers far more resistant than unsanctioned individuals. The mark also establishes the permanent connection that allows astropaths to draw on the Emperor's distant strength during their work, a psychic anchor that helps them navigate the warp's dangers and maintain stability when confronting horrors that would break unprotected minds. The survival rate for soul binding hovers around 70% under optimal conditions, though this figure varies based on candidate quality and the specific circumstances of each ritual. Approximately 3 in 10 candidates died during the ceremony, their minds unable to withstand the Emperor's presence despite all preparation and training. Death comes in various forms. Some candidates' minds simply shatter, their consciousness fragmenting under pressure it cannot bear. These individuals typically die instantly, their bodies collapsing on the dais as brain death occurs. Others survive the initial contact only to succumb moments later as the psychic shock propagates through their system, causing cascading failures of vital organs. A few linger for hours or days in comatose states before expiring, their bodies alive but their minds too damaged to sustain consciousness. The facilitating astropaths monitor each ritual carefully, prepared to sever the connection if a candidate begins failing catastrophically, though by the time such failure becomes apparent, intervention rarely saves the individual. The bodies of those who die during soul binding receive respectful treatment despite their failure. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica recognizes that these individuals volunteered for service and endured years of training before attempting the ritual. Their corpses are cremated in consecrated furnaces, their ashes interred in crypts beneath the Forbidden Fortress, alongside the remains of countless others who died in similar circumstances. Prayers are offered for their souls, and their names are recorded in the fortress's memorial archives. This treatment contrasts with the disposal methods used for psykers deemed too weak or unstable for soul binding, whose bodies typically receive no such consideration after their consumption by the Astronomican or Golden Throne. Those who survive emerge from the soul binding chambers fundamentally transformed. The facilitating astropaths guide them carefully, supporting their physical bodies as they struggle to adapt to the loss of sight and the overwhelming input from their newly awakened witch sight. Most survivors can barely stand, their bodies trembling from exhaustion and shock. Many weep uncontrollably, though whether from pain, relief, or the emotional impact of what they have experienced varies between individuals. Some laugh hysterically, their minds struggling to process the magnitude of what has occurred. The facilitators guide these newly bound astropaths to the recovery chambers, speaking constantly in calm, reassuring tones, helping them maintain focus and preventing them from retreating into catatonia or madness. The recovery period extends for weeks or months depending on the individual's resilience and the severity of their physical and psychological trauma. Medical staff treat the physical damage to the astropaths' faces, cleaning and bandaging the ruined eyes to prevent infection while the tissue heals. Pain management proves challenging, as the psychic nature of the injury resists conventional analgesics. Specially trained Medicae with psychic abilities provide what relief they can, using their own powers to soothe the new astropath's suffering. Physical therapy helps the newly blind learn to navigate using their other senses and their witch sight, teaching them to interpret the psychic information flooding their awareness and translate it into useful perception of their environment. Psychological counseling occupies much of the recovery period. Senior astropaths meet regularly with the newly bound, helping them process the experience and adapt to their changed existence. These counselors teach techniques for managing the permanent psychic connection to the Emperor, showing the new astropaths how to draw strength from it without becoming overwhelmed by constant awareness of his presence. They help the newly bound understand and accept the personality changes they experience, framing these alterations as natural consequences of their transformation rather than losses to be mourned. Group sessions allow newly bound astropaths to share their experiences with others undergoing similar adaptation, creating support networks that help many individuals maintain stability during this difficult transition. The adaptation to witch sight requires extensive practice and instruction. The new astropaths must learn to filter and interpret the constant stream of psychic information bombarding their senses. Without training, witch sight proves overwhelming, a chaotic flood of impressions that provides more confusion than useful awareness. Instructors teach the newly bound how to focus their perception, how to distinguish important information from background noise, and how to shift their attention between different aspects of psychic reality. They practice identifying individuals by their psychic signatures, learning to recognize specific people through the unique patterns of their presence in the warp. They develop the ability to perceive emotional states, reading the psychic impressions that accompany different feelings. They learn to navigate physical spaces using witch sight, interpreting the psychic echoes of material objects and the ambient energy that suffuses all matter. Only after completing this recovery and adaptation period do newly bound astropaths proceed to final assignment. The time required varies significantly between individuals, with some adapting within weeks, while others need months to achieve functional competence with their transformed senses and altered psychology. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica maintains no fixed schedule for this process, recognizing that rushing individuals into service before they have fully adapted risks catastrophic failures in the field. Each astropath undergoes final evaluation before assignment, demonstrating their ability to perform basic astropathic functions and their psychological stability under controlled stress. Those who pass receive their assignments and depart Terra to begin their service to the Imperium, carrying with them the Emperor's mark and the burden of knowledge gained through direct contact with his consciousness. The process of astro-telepathic communication begins with the astropath entering a meditative trance state, their consciousness gradually detaching from immediate physical awareness while maintaining enough connection to their body to ensure safe return. This transition requires careful control, as moving too quickly into deep trance risks disorientation, while proceeding too slowly wastes precious time and energy. Experienced astropaths develop personal techniques for achieving the optimal trance depth, methods refined through years of practice until they become nearly automatic. Some use rhythmic breathing patterns that slow their heart rate and quiet their thoughts. Others employ mental exercises that progressively shut down awareness of physical sensations, peeling away layers of material consciousness until only their psychic self remains active. The specific method matters less than the result, a state where the astropath's psychic presence becomes strong enough to project beyond their physical location while their body remains anchored safely in real space. Once properly entranced, the astropath extends their consciousness toward the warp, pushing through the barrier that separates material reality from the immaterium. This boundary exists as a kind of membrane, simultaneously separating and connecting the two realms. Psykers perceive it differently based on their training and natural abilities, but most astropaths describe a sensation of pressure followed by sudden release as their awareness breaks through into the warp. The transition brings immediate sensory overload. The Imperium assaults the astropath's perception with chaotic stimuli that bear no relationship to physical senses. Colors that have no names in human language swirl in patterns that hurt to perceive. Sounds that are not sounds echo through dimensions that do not exist in real space. The psychic screaming of demons, the death cries of distant souls, and the incomprehensible whispers of entities that defy categorization create a cacophony that would drive an unprotected mind to immediate madness. The astropath's soul binding provides essential protection during this exposure. The connection to the Emperor acts as a psychic anchor, a fixed point of reference that prevents the astropath from becoming lost in the warp's chaos. This anchor manifests differently to each astropath's perception, but most describe it as a distant light or warmth that remains constant regardless of the warp's turbulence. The soul binding's protective aspect also filters some of the Imperium's worst assaults, preventing the most dangerous psychic phenomena from directly touching the astropath's consciousness. Without this protection, even the most disciplined psyker would last mere moments before succumbing to possession, dissolution, or transformation into something no longer remotely human. Navigating the warp's psychic currents demands skills that take decades to master fully. The Imperium flows in patterns that shift constantly, streams of psychic energy moving through the realm like invisible rivers. These currents carry information, emotions, and fragments of consciousness torn from living minds or left behind by the dead. An astropath must learn to read these flows, identifying which currents move in useful directions and which lead toward regions of particular danger. The process resembles sailing, with the astropath adjusting their psychic presence to catch favorable currents while avoiding those that would carry them into hazardous areas. Experienced astropaths develop intuitive understanding of warp topology, recognizing patterns that indicate stable routes versus regions where reality's fabric grows thin and demonic presence intensifies. The transmission of messages requires encoding information into thought forms that can survive passage through the warp. Direct telepathic communication works reliably across short distances where the warp remains relatively calm, but longer ranges introduce distortion that corrupts literal information. An astropath attempting to transmit a straightforward tactical report across a sector might find that specific numbers become garbled, proper names transform into gibberish, or entire sections of the message disappear completely. To combat this degradation, astropaths employ symbolic encoding that translates concrete information into archetypal concepts and images less vulnerable to warp corruption. A message about an orc invasion becomes a psychic construct built from impressions of green-skinned brutality, crude violence, overwhelming numbers, and the particular psychic signature that orc gestalt consciousness produces. The receiving astropath interprets these symbols back into actionable intelligence, a process that introduces some ambiguity, but ensures the message's core meaning survives transmission. The symbolic languages used for astro-telepathic communication evolved over 10,000 years of trial and error. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica maintains standardized lexicons that all astropaths learn during training, frameworks of archetypal images, and concepts that translate reliably across the warp. These lexicons include symbols for common military situations, Xenos threats, natural disasters, political developments, and administrative matters. An astropath reporting a Tyranid incursion uses established symbols representing insatiable hunger, biological horror, hive mind consciousness, and the distinctive psychic void that Tyranid presence creates. Messages about warp storms employ symbols of chaos, temporal distortion, and impassable barriers. The standardization ensures that any astropath can interpret messages from any other regardless of personal background or regional variations in training, maintaining consistency across the Imperium's vast communication network. Personal ciphers add additional security layers to sensitive transmissions. Important messages, particularly those containing strategic intelligence or high-level administrative decisions, require encryption beyond the standard symbolic encoding. Astropaths develop unique psychic signatures that function like cryptographic keys, patterns of thought and emotion distinctive to each individual. An astropath encrypting a message weaves their personal cipher throughout the transmission, creating a psychic lock that only the intended recipient can open. The receiving astropath must possess knowledge of the sender's cipher, information typically shared during face-to-face meetings or transmitted through secure channels before encryption becomes necessary. This system prevents hostile psykers or demonic entities from intercepting and reading sensitive Imperial communications, though sufficiently powerful warp entities can sometimes break these encryptions through brute psychic force or cunning manipulation. The actual transmission involves projecting the encoded thought form into the warp with sufficient force to reach the intended destination. The astropath shapes their message carefully, compressing information into the most compact psychic structure possible while maintaining clarity. They then release this construct into the Imperium, directing it along favorable currents toward the target location. The thought form travels through the warp at speeds that vary wildly depending on conditions, sometimes arriving within hours and other times taking weeks or months to complete journeys that should require days. The astropath cannot control the message once released, only hope that it survives the journey intact and reaches its destination before becoming too degraded to interpret accurately. Distance imposes severe limitations on astro-telepathic communication reliability. Messages transmitted across a single planetary system or between nearby worlds in the same sector typically arrive with minimal corruption, their content largely intact and interpretable with reasonable accuracy. Communications spanning multiple sectors face increasing degradation as distance grows, with longer transmissions requiring more powerful astropaths and accepting greater risk of garbling or complete loss. Attempting to transmit across segmentum boundaries, or from one side of the Imperium to the other, pushes the limits of what even the most skilled astropaths can achieve. Such extreme-range communications often arrive as fragmentary impressions rather than coherent messages, requiring the receiving astropath to reconstruct the sender's intent from incomplete information. Some regions of the Imperium remain effectively isolated due to distance combined with adverse warp conditions, their communications with the wider Imperium sporadic at best. Warp conditions affect transmission success dramatically. Calm warp weather allows messages to travel efficiently along stable currents with minimal interference. During such periods, astropaths can maintain regular communication schedules and expect reasonable delivery times for their transmissions. Turbulent conditions introduce delays, distortions, and increased risk of message loss. Warp storms represent the worst-case scenario, massive disturbances in the Imperium that make communication completely impossible. These storms block psychic transmissions entirely, their chaotic energies overwhelming any attempt to project thought forms through affected regions. An astropath trying to transmit during a warp storm experiences their message torn apart instantly, the carefully constructed thought form shredded by forces beyond any psyker's ability to resist. Storms can last days, months, or even years, cutting off entire sectors from contact with the rest of the Imperium and leaving populations isolated until conditions improve. The time delay inherent in warp-based communication creates significant challenges for Imperial coordination. Unlike instantaneous communication systems that might exist in other settings, astro-telepathy provides faster-than-light transmission but not immediate delivery. A message sent from a frontier world warning of Xeno's incursion might take weeks to reach Sector Command, with the response requiring additional weeks to return. By the time reinforcements arrive based on that initial warning, the tactical situation may have changed completely. Military commanders learn to account for these delays in their planning, building flexibility into their strategies and granting local forces authority to respond to immediate threats without waiting for approval from distant superiors. The communication lag also affects governance, with planetary governors often making decisions that higher imperial authorities only learn about long after the fact. Reception of astro-telepathic messages requires constant psychic vigilance. Astropaths assigned to receive transmissions maintain what they call the listening watch, a state of partial trance where their consciousness remains open to incoming psychic signals while still maintaining enough awareness to function in the material world. This divided attention proves mentally exhausting, and receiving astropaths typically work in shifts to prevent burnout. The listening astropath filters through the warp's background noise, searching for the distinctive patterns that indicate legitimate Imperial transmissions. They must distinguish these messages from the countless other psychic phenomena that fill the Imperium, the emotional broadcasts of distant populations, the predatory lures of demonic entities attempting to trick psykers into opening themselves to possession, and the psychic echoes of ancient events that replay endlessly in the warp. Identifying genuine messages among this chaos requires experience and keen psychic perception, skills that develop only through years of practice. Once detected, incoming messages must be captured and interpreted carefully. The receiving astropath focuses their attention on the transmission, drawing it fully into their consciousness while maintaining shields against other warp phenomena. They examine the thought form structure, identifying the symbolic encoding and translating it back into concrete information. This interpretation process introduces potential for error, as symbols can carry multiple meanings, and the receiving astropath must judge which interpretation makes most sense given context and their knowledge of current events. Ambiguous messages might require clarification requests sent back to the original transmitter, adding further delays to the communication process. Messages that arrive severely corrupted by warp transit may prove partially or completely unreadable, forcing the receiving astropath to request retransmission or work with fragmentary information. Hostile interception represents a constant threat to Imperial communications. Enemy psykers, particularly those serving chaos, actively monitor warp traffic searching for Imperial transmissions to intercept. A captured message provides valuable intelligence about Imperial dispositions, plans, and weaknesses. More dangerously, hostile psykers sometimes attempt to inject false messages into Imperial communication networks, forging transmissions that appear to come from legitimate sources but contain misinformation designed to confuse or mislead. Astropaths employ various countermeasures against interception, including the personal ciphers mentioned earlier, transmission timing that makes interception more difficult, and psychic authentication protocols that help verify message origins. Despite these precautions, some messages inevitably fall into enemy hands, a reality that commanders account for by limiting sensitive information in astro-telepathic transmissions and using code phrases that require additional context to interpret correctly. Demonic entities pose an even greater danger than enemy psykers. These warp predators sometimes intercept astro-telepathic transmissions, not for the information they contain, but as vectors for attacking the astropaths involved. A demon might corrupt a message in transit, weaving its own malign influence into the thought form, so that when the receiving astropath opens their mind to interpret it, they expose themselves to possession or psychic assault. More subtle entities plant false information or alter messages in ways that cause the Imperium to make catastrophic decisions based on corrupted intelligence. The soul binding provides significant protection against such attacks, but exhausted or careless astropaths can still fall victim to particularly cunning demons. Standard protocols require receiving astropaths to examine all incoming messages for signs of corruption before fully engaging with their content, though this precaution cannot eliminate all risk. Choir casting represents the most powerful technique available to Imperial astropaths, employed when circumstances demand transmission across extreme distances or through particularly adverse warp conditions. This method involves multiple astropaths working in perfect synchronization, their combined psychic strength far exceeding what any individual could achieve. The choir members enter trance simultaneously, linking their consciousnesses into a unified psychic construct. One astropath, designated as the primary, shapes and directs the message, while the others provide raw power and stability. The combined strength allows the choir to punch through warp interference that would stop a single astropath's transmission, reaching destinations that would otherwise remain beyond contact range. Choir casting demands precise coordination and mutual trust among participants, as the psychic linking makes all members vulnerable to anything that affects any individual. A demon attacking one choir member potentially gains access to all, making choir casting sessions high-risk operations that require extensive protective measures. Psychic relay stations extend the effective range of astro-telepathic communication throughout the Imperium. These facilities, typically located on strategically important worlds or in regions with relatively stable warp conditions, house multiple astropaths dedicated to receiving and retransmitting messages. A transmission originating from a distant frontier world might pass through several relay stations before reaching its final destination, with astropaths at each station receiving the message, interpreting it, and then retransmitting it toward the next relay point or ultimate recipient. This relay system allows messages to traverse distances that would prove impossible for direct transmission, though each relay introduces additional delay and potential for corruption or misinterpretation. The relay stations also serve as message clearinghouses, sorting incoming transmissions by priority and destination, ensuring that urgent military intelligence receives immediate attention while routine administrative communications wait their turn. Priority protocols govern which messages receive transmission first when demand exceeds available astropath capacity. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica maintains strict hierarchies of importance, with certain message types automatically receiving precedence over others. Warnings of demonic incursion, reports of warp storm formation, and urgent military intelligence take absolute priority, transmitted immediately regardless of other traffic. Strategic military communications rank next, followed by important administrative matters, then routine governance reports and commercial messages. Astropaths assigned to transmission duty follow these protocols rigorously, though senior officials can override standard priorities in exceptional circumstances. The priority system ensures that critical information reaches decision makers as quickly as possible, though lower priority messages sometimes face substantial delays during periods of high communication volume. Authentication methods verify sender identity and message legitimacy, protecting against forgeries and ensuring recipients can trust the information they receive. Each astropath possesses unique psychic signatures that function like fingerprints, distinctive patterns woven into their transmissions that identify them to other astropaths. Recipients compare these signatures against records maintained by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, confirming that messages actually originate from their claimed sources. Additional authentication layers include code phrases that change regularly, psychic seals that only authorized astropaths know how to create, and challenge response protocols where the receiving astropath sends verification, requests that legitimate senders can answer correctly. These systems provide reasonable security against most forgery attempts, though sophisticated enemies sometimes succeed in spoofing authentication markers, particularly when they have captured and corrupted Imperial astropaths who possess legitimate credentials. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica assigns newly soul-bound astropaths to posts throughout the Imperium based on strategic necessity, operational requirements, and the individual capabilities demonstrated during training and recovery. The assignment process accounts for numerous variables beyond simple availability. Officials evaluate each astropath's power level, their aptitude for specific types of communication work, psychological resilience, and physical condition when determining appropriate postings. An astropath demonstrating exceptional strength might receive assignment to a remote frontier station where they must maintain communications across vast distances with minimal support. Those showing particular skill in interpreting corrupted or fragmentary messages could find themselves attached to inquisitorial retinues where such abilities prove invaluable. Astropaths with stable temperaments and strong organizational skills often go to major administrative centers where they process high volumes of routine communications. The Imperial Navy consumes a substantial portion of available astropaths, with every vessel of significance requiring at least one telepath to maintain contact with Fleet Command and coordinate with other ships during operations. Battleships and cruisers typically host multiple astropaths, their complement size reflecting the vessel's importance and communication needs. Smaller escorts might share a single astropath between several ships, rotating the telepath as operational requirements dictate. The assignment to naval service carries particular prestige among astropaths, as these positions place them at the forefront of Imperial military operations and offer opportunities to serve in crucial engagements that shape the Imperium's fate. Naval astropaths receive additional training in military communication protocols, learning the specific terminology and reporting formats that fleet operations demand. Battle Fleet Command Stations represent some of the most demanding postings available to astropaths. These massive installations, whether orbital fortresses or dedicated command vessels, serve as coordination hubs for entire naval battle groups. The astropaths stationed at these facilities work in teams that sometimes number in the dozens, processing constant streams of incoming reports from scattered fleet elements, while transmitting orders and intelligence updates to ships operating across multiple systems. The communication volume at major command stations exceeds what individual astropaths could handle, necessitating shift rotations and specialized role assignments. Some astropaths focus exclusively on receiving transmissions, maintaining constant psychic vigil for incoming messages. Others specialize in transmission, shaping and sending the orders that direct fleet movements and tactical responses. Senior astropaths coordinate these efforts, prioritizing messages and ensuring critical communications receive immediate attention. The Administratum employs thousands of astropaths throughout its sprawling bureaucratic apparatus, particularly at sector capitals and subsector administrative centers, where governance demands reliable long-range communication. These astropaths spend their service processing the endless paperwork that keeps the Imperium functioning, transmitting tithe assessments, receiving compliance reports, coordinating resource allocations, and maintaining the information flow that allows the Adeptus Terra to govern worlds it may never physically visit. The work proves tedious compared to military assignments, lacking the dramatic urgency of naval operations or battlefield communications, but the Administratum astropaths understand their essential role in Imperial governance. Without their efforts, the bureaucratic machinery would grind to a halt, leaving worlds isolated from central authority and unable to coordinate responses to threats or efficiently distribute resources. Administratum postings offer certain advantages despite their monotonous nature. These astropaths work in secure facilities with excellent support infrastructure, reliable access to medical care, and comfortable living quarters that contrast sharply with the cramped conditions aboard naval vessels or the primitive accommodations at frontier stations. They maintain regular schedules with predictable duty rotations, avoiding the irregular hours and constant crisis response that characterize military service. The psychic environment remains relatively calm, as administrative centers typically exist in stable regions of Imperial space where warp conditions permit reliable communication. Many astropaths assigned to Administratum service spend decades in the same posting, developing expertise in specific administrative functions and establishing professional relationships with the officials they serve. The Astra Militarum maintains astropaths at military headquarters throughout the Imperium, from planetary garrison commands to crusade fleet coordination centers. These telepaths provide the communication backbone that allows Imperial Guard forces to coordinate operations across multiple worlds, request reinforcements, report enemy movements, and maintain contact with higher command echelons. Military headquarters astropaths work closely with strategic planning staffs, often participating directly in operational briefings, where their ability to quickly transmit or receive crucial intelligence proves invaluable. They develop familiarity with military terminology and tactical concepts, learning to interpret and convey complex battlefield information accurately despite the symbolic nature of astro-telepathic encoding. Combat zone assignments place astropaths in active war zones where they provide direct communication support to fighting forces. These postings carry significant danger, as astropaths become priority targets for enemy forces who understand the disruption caused by eliminating Imperial communications capability. The Astra Militarum assigns dedicated protection details to safeguard their astropaths, typically veteran soldiers trained specifically in close protection duties. Despite these precautions, combat zone astropaths face constant risk from artillery bombardment, enemy raids, and the general chaos of warfare. Many develop fatalistic attitudes, understanding that their service likely means early death, but taking pride in the vital support they provide to Imperial forces fighting on the front lines. Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus, Ordo Xenos, and Ordo Hereticus frequently request personal astropaths to accompany their investigations and operations. These assignments carry unique challenges and opportunities, as Inquisitors operate with extraordinary autonomy and pursue missions that take them into the most dangerous regions of Imperial space. An astropath attached to an Inquisitor might find themselves investigating demon cults on corrupted worlds, tracking Xenos infiltration in supposedly secure sectors, or pursuing heretical organizations through the underhives of major population centers. The work demands flexibility, discretion, and willingness to witness horrors that would break ordinary citizens. Inquisitorial astropaths often receive special training in recognizing signs of corruption, as their masters rely on their psychic perceptions to detect threats that escape conventional investigation methods. The relationship between Inquisitor and astropath develops uniquely in each case. Some Inquisitors treat their astropaths as valued advisors, consulting them on psychic matters and trusting their judgment regarding warp-related phenomena. Others view them purely as tools, useful for their communication abilities, but otherwise insignificant. The most paranoid Inquisitors maintain constant surveillance of their astropaths, watching for any sign of corruption or divided loyalty. Regardless of the specific dynamic, astropaths serving Inquisitors understand they operate under intense scrutiny, and that failure or suspected treachery will result in immediate execution. The Inquisition tolerates no weakness in its servants, and an astropath who proves unreliable faces summary judgment without appeal or mercy. Rogue trader dynasties prize astropaths highly, as these merchant explorers venture far beyond the Imperium's established borders, where reliable communication proves essential for survival and profit. A rogue trader's warrant of trade grants them authority to claim new worlds for the Imperium, establish trade routes, and conduct business in regions where Imperial law barely reaches. Their astropaths maintain contact with the dynasty's commercial network, coordinate with other rogue trader vessels, and provide warnings of dangers encountered in unexplored space. The posting offers astropaths unusual freedom compared to more structured Imperial assignments, as rogue traders operate with minimal oversight and often develop informal relationships with their crews rather than maintaining strict military hierarchy. The compensation and conditions for astropaths serving rogue traders vary wildly depending on the dynasty's wealth and the individual trader's character. Successful dynasties provide their astropaths with comfortable quarters, generous stipends, and shares in profitable ventures. Less scrupulous traders treat their astropaths as expendable assets, working them to exhaustion and providing minimal support. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica maintains nominal oversight of these assignments, but the distances involved and the rogue trader's legal independence limit effective supervision. Astropaths who find themselves mistreated by their trader employers have limited recourse beyond attempting to request reassignment, a process that might take years given the communication delays inherent in reaching telepathica authorities from beyond the Imperium's borders. Countless other postings scatter astropaths throughout Imperial space in roles too numerous and varied to catalog completely. Forge worlds of the Adeptus Mechanicus employ astropaths to coordinate with other Mechanicus installations and maintain communication with explorator fleets searching for lost technology. Ecclesiarchy cardinals and archconfessors maintain personal astropaths to transmit theological rulings and coordinate missionary efforts across their dioceses. Navigator houses sometimes hire astropaths to supplement their own communication capabilities, particularly when coordinating the movements of multiple vessels under house contract. Planetary governors on important worlds keep astropaths in their courts, using them to maintain contact with the wider Imperium and demonstrate their world's significance. Even some wealthy merchant guilds and trade cartels employ astropaths, though these commercial assignments rank among the lowest prestige postings available and typically go to astropaths showing limited capability for more demanding roles. Life aboard Imperial void ships presents unique challenges for shipboard astropaths, who must adapt to the confined environment and particular stresses of void travel while maintaining their communication duties. Naval vessels dedicate specialized chambers called choir crypts to house their astropaths, spaces designed specifically to facilitate astro-telepathic work in the cramped confines of a warship. These chambers occupy interior locations deep within the vessel's hull, positioned away from external threats and surrounded by structural elements that provide some protection against weapons fire. The typical choir crypt features psychically resonant materials in its construction, substances that help astropaths achieve proper trance states and maintain stable connections to the warp, despite the ship's movement through real space and periodic transitions into warp travel. The choir crypt's interior reflects its dual purpose as working space and living quarters. The chamber contains meditation alcoves where astropaths enter trance for transmission or reception work, these spaces equipped with restraint systems that secure the astropath's body during the deep trance states required for long-range communication. The walls bear protective wards similar to those found in the soul-binding chambers on Terra, though less elaborate given the practical constraints of shipboard installation. Lighting remains dim and adjustable, allowing astropaths to create the environment most conducive to their psychic work. Basic living accommodations occupy sections of the choir crypt, including sleeping pallets, personal storage, and sometimes small shrine spaces where astropaths maintain devotional practices. Larger vessels with multiple astropaths might dedicate several interconnected chambers to their telepaths, creating small communities within the ship's vast structure. Shipboard astropaths typically work in small groups rather than alone, the Imperial Navy having learned through long experience that multiple telepaths provide redundancy and mutual support essential for reliable naval communications. A cruiser might host 3 to 5 astropaths who rotate duties, ensuring constant coverage for incoming transmissions while preventing individual exhaustion. These small teams develop close working relationships, their psychic abilities making them unusually aware of each other's mental and emotional states. They coordinate their efforts during complex communications, with one astropath maintaining the primary connection, while others provide support and backup capability. During combat operations, the entire team might work simultaneously, processing the flood of tactical communications that fleet engagements generate. The isolation inherent in shipboard service affects astropaths profoundly. Naval vessels operate on voyages that last months or years, during which the astropaths remain confined within the ship's hull with limited contact beyond their immediate crewmates. The crew's general wariness of psykers creates social barriers that prevent most astropaths from forming genuine friendships with non-psychic personnel. Even officers who work closely with the ship's astropaths maintain professional distance, treating them with wary respect rather than camaraderie. This isolation compounds the fundamental loneliness that most astropaths experience regardless of their posting, the sense of being forever separate from normal humanity due to their blindness, their psychic abilities, and the mark of soul binding that sets them apart. Void travel itself presents unique stresses beyond simple isolation. Ships traveling through the warp create disturbing psychic conditions that astropaths find particularly uncomfortable. The vessel's Geller field protects the crew from direct warp exposure, but astropaths with their heightened psychic sensitivity perceive the Imperium pressing against the field's boundaries. They feel the presence of entities swimming through the warp, alongside the ship, demonic predators that follow Imperial vessels, hoping for Geller field failures that would allow them to board and slaughter the crew. Some astropaths report nightmares during warp transit, their sleeping minds touched by the realm's influence despite their soul binding's protection. The psychological toll accumulates over years of service, with veteran shipboard astropaths often developing nervous habits, heightened paranoia, or detachment from emotional connection as coping mechanisms. The astropath's role extends beyond simple message transmission and reception. Ship captains and fleet commanders rely on their telepaths to provide warnings of warp-based threats that conventional sensors cannot detect. An astropath might sense approaching warp storms before navigational equipment registers any anomaly, giving the ship precious time to alter course or seek shelter. They detect the psychic signatures of enemy psykers operating in nearby systems, potentially revealing hostile fleet movements or ambush preparations. Some astropaths develop precognitive abilities that manifest as vague impressions of impending danger, warnings that experienced captains learn to heed despite their imprecise nature. This threat detection capability makes astropaths invaluable beyond their communication function, transforming them into early warning systems that can mean the difference between survival and destruction. Fleet coordination during combat operations pushes shipboard astropaths to their operational limits. Naval engagements involve dozens or hundreds of vessels maneuvering in three-dimensional space while exchanging weapons fire and attempting to maintain formation cohesion. The communications demands during such battles overwhelm conventional Vox systems, which suffer from jamming, battle damage, and the simple confusion of multiple ships trying to transmit simultaneously. Astropaths provide backup communications that enemy jamming cannot disrupt, transmitting urgent tactical updates and receiving orders from Fleet Command even when conventional systems fail. The psychic strain of maintaining multiple communication channels simultaneously during the chaos of battle exhausts astropaths rapidly, but naval doctrine accepts this cost as necessary for effective fleet operations. Astropathic stations on planets and orbital installations function as the communication hubs that bind the Imperium together, processing the constant flow of messages that coordinate governance, military operations, and commercial activity across Imperial space. These facilities range from small outposts hosting a single astropath on minor worlds to massive complexes employing hundreds of telepaths on sector capitals and other strategically crucial locations. The larger stations operate continuously, their astropaths working in shifts that maintain round-the-clock coverage for incoming transmissions. The facilities occupy secure locations, typically within heavily fortified structures that protect them from enemy attack and provide the stable environment necessary for reliable psychic work. The internal organization of major astropathic stations reflects their complex operational requirements. Receiving sections house astropaths who maintain constant listening watch, their minds open to incoming transmissions from across their designated coverage area. These telepaths work in specialized chambers equipped with psychic dampening technology that filters background warp noise, allowing them to focus on legitimate Imperial communications. Transmission sections occupy separate spaces where astropaths prepare and send outgoing messages, working from queues prioritized according to established protocols. Administrative offices coordinate the station's operations, managing personnel schedules, maintaining message logs, and liaising with local Imperial authorities who depend on the station's services. The message processing workflow at major stations handles thousands of transmissions daily. Incoming messages arrive at unpredictable intervals, their reception depending on warp conditions and the strength of distant transmitters. Receiving astropaths capture these transmissions and immediately transcribe them into written form, translating the psychic symbols and impressions into standard Gothic text. Junior adepts verify the transcriptions, checking for obvious errors or corruption that might indicate warp interference or demonic tampering. The messages then move to sorting sections, where clerks categorize them by destination, priority, and content type. High-priority military intelligence goes immediately to designated recipients, while routine administrative communications enter queues for eventual transmission to their final destinations. Relay operations form a crucial component of astropathic station functions, as most long-range communications require multiple transmission hops to reach their ultimate recipients. A message originating from a frontier world might pass through 3 or 4 relay stations before arriving at its destination in the Imperium's core regions. Each relay point receives the message, interprets it, and retransmits it toward the next station along the route to the final recipient. This relay system extends the effective range of astro-telepathic communication far beyond what direct transmission could achieve, though each hop introduces delay and potential for cumulative corruption. Station astropaths develop expertise in recognizing which messages require immediate relay versus those that can wait for optimal transmission windows when warp conditions favor long-range communication. Coordination between stations maintains the network's overall functionality. Senior astropaths at major hubs communicate regularly with their counterparts at other facilities, sharing information about warp conditions, discussing transmission success rates, and coordinating responses to communication disruptions. When warp storms or other phenomena block standard relay routes, the stations work together to identify alternative paths that messages can follow to reach their destinations. This coordination requires the most experienced and capable astropaths, individuals who combine strong psychic abilities with the administrative skills necessary to manage complex logistics across interstellar distances. The social position occupied by astropaths within Imperial society embodies fundamental contradictions that define their existence. They receive official respect and legal protection reflecting their essential service to the Imperium, yet face constant suspicion and fear from the populations they serve. Imperial law grants astropaths specific privileges unavailable to ordinary citizens, including freedom of movement throughout the Imperium, authority to requisition resources necessary for their duties, and protection from interference by local authorities. Harming or impeding an astropath in the performance of their duties carries severe legal penalties, with perpetrators facing harsh punishment regardless of their social status. These protections recognize that the Imperium's communication network depends entirely on astropaths' willing cooperation, and that any threat to their safety undermines Imperial security. Despite this official status, astropaths rarely escape the deep-seated fear that Imperial citizens harbor toward all psykers. Common people view them with unease bordering on terror, making protective signs and avoiding direct contact whenever possible. The astropath's blindness marks them visibly as different, their ruined eyes serving as constant reminder of their psychic nature and the terrible ritual that transformed them. Their witch sight allows them to perceive things ordinary humans cannot see, creating discomfort among those who realize the astropath sees their emotional state, their fears, and aspects of their nature they prefer to keep hidden. Superstitious populations attribute various misfortunes to astropath presence, blaming them for bad weather, crop failures, or personal tragedies despite the irrationality of such accusations. The educated classes and Imperial officials maintain more nuanced attitudes, but rarely achieve genuine comfort around astropaths. They understand intellectually that soul-bound telepaths serve the Emperor and pose minimal possession risk, yet instinctive wariness persists. Planetary governors and military commanders who work closely with astropaths develop professional relationships based on mutual necessity rather than trust or friendship. They value the astropath's services while simultaneously viewing them as dangerous tools requiring careful handling. Even among the Adeptus Astra Telepathica's own personnel, those without psychic abilities maintain careful distance from the astropaths they administer, their interactions remaining formal and brief whenever possible. This isolation extends to living arrangements and social interactions. Astropaths assigned to population centers typically reside in dedicated quarters separate from normal residential areas, housed in facilities that provide security while simultaneously segregating them from the general population. They take meals apart from non-psychic personnel when stationed at military installations or administrative centers. Social gatherings exclude them except when their presence serves specific purposes, and invitations to participate in normal recreational activities rarely materialize. Most astropaths accept this isolation as inevitable, understanding that their nature fundamentally separates them from baseline humanity, regardless of official protections or expressions of gratitude for their service. The privileges granted to astropaths provide practical benefits while reinforcing their outsider status. They travel freely aboard Imperial vessels without requiring standard documentation, their sole binding mark serving as identification and authorization. They access restricted areas of installations where their duties take them, passing through security checkpoints that stop ordinary citizens. They receive priority access to medical care and other support services when needed for their work. Yet these privileges highlight their difference rather than integrating them into normal society, marking them as special cases who exist outside standard social structures. The combination of privilege and isolation creates a peculiar social position where astropaths wield significant practical authority while remaining perpetually marginalized in personal and social contexts. The astropaths themselves develop various strategies for coping with their ambiguous status. Some embrace their isolation, cultivating detachment from normal human concerns and finding community exclusively among other psykers who share their experiences. Others maintain determined optimism, seeking connection despite repeated rejection and holding faith that their service earns genuine respect even if not friendship. Many adopt fatalistic attitudes, accepting their role as necessary sacrifices whose comfort and happiness matter less than their function within the Imperial machine. The specific coping mechanism varies by individual temperament and experience, but all astropaths must somehow reconcile their essential importance to the Imperium with their perpetual status as feared outsiders, whose presence makes even those they serve deeply uncomfortable. The soul binding provides substantial protection against demonic possession and warp corruption, yet astropaths remain psykers who regularly expose themselves to the Imperium's dangers. Their work demands constant interaction with the realm that spawned chaos itself, creating vulnerabilities that no amount of ritual protection can completely eliminate. Enemy psykers represent one of the most immediate threats, as hostile telepaths actively hunt for Imperial communications to intercept or disrupt. Chaos sorcerers possess techniques specifically designed to attack astropaths during transmission, striking when the Imperial telepath's consciousness extends into the warp and their defenses necessarily weaken to allow message projection. These attacks range from simple disruption that corrupts or destroys the transmission to direct psychic assault intended to kill or incapacitate the astropath. A sorcerer skilled in such warfare can trace an incoming Imperial transmission back to its source, following the psychic connection to strike at the sending astropath with focused malevolence that bypasses many conventional protections. The nature of these attacks varies based on the enemy psyker's abilities and intentions. Some launch crude psychic bolts, raw warp energy shaped into weapons that burn through mental defenses and sear the target's consciousness. Others employ subtle corruption, introducing thoughts and impulses that feel like the astropath's own but actually originate from the hostile telepath. The most dangerous attacks exploit the astropath's necessary openness during transmission, slipping past shields that must remain lowered for communication to function. An astropath struck during transmission faces terrible choices: maintain the communication and risk destruction, or abort the message and potentially lose critical intelligence that Imperial forces need. Many choose to complete their transmissions despite ongoing attack, accepting injury or death as the price of duty. Psychic backlash from warp storms inflicts damage even when no hostile intent targets the astropath specifically. The massive energies unleashed by these disturbances in the Imperium create shockwaves that propagate through the warp like tsunamis across an ocean. An astropath whose consciousness extends into the warp when such a storm erupts experiences the full force of this psychic maelstrom. The backlash manifests as overwhelming sensory input that floods the astropath's mind, thoughts and perceptions from millions of terrified souls caught in the storm's influence crashing against their consciousness simultaneously. The sheer volume of psychic noise can permanently damage an astropath's ability to filter and interpret warp phenomena, leaving them unable to distinguish legitimate transmissions from background chaos. Severe backlash causes physical symptoms including seizures, hemorrhaging from eyes and nose, and in extreme cases, complete mental breakdown, as the astropath's sanity shatters under pressure their mind cannot withstand. Experienced astropaths learn to recognize the warning signs that precede major warp storms, sensing the building pressure in the Imperium before the storm fully manifests. Standard protocols require immediate withdrawal from active transmission or reception when these warnings appear, though the unpredictable nature of warp phenomena means storms sometimes strike without adequate warning. Astropaths caught in the warp during storm onset must attempt emergency withdrawal, severing their psychic connection and retreating to their physical body as quickly as possible. The process proves difficult during the chaos of storm formation, as the normal landmarks and reference points astropaths use for navigation become obscured or distorted. Some astropaths become lost in the warp during such emergencies, their consciousness unable to find the path back to their physical form. Their bodies remain alive but empty, breathing and maintaining basic functions, while the mind remains trapped in the Imperium until death claims the abandoned flesh. The attention of chaos entities represents perhaps the greatest danger astropaths face beyond simple possession. Their regular presence in the warp makes them visible to the realm's inhabitants, and the psychic light of their soul-binding draws notice from beings that hunger for the Emperor's power. Lesser demons typically cannot overcome the protection soul binding provides, but they gather around active astropaths like sharks circling prey, waiting for moments of weakness or distraction that might allow them to strike. Greater demons and chaos entities of significant power view soul-bound astropaths as challenges worth pursuing, their corruption representing a meaningful victory against the Imperium. These powerful beings employ patience and cunning that lesser demons lack, studying individual astropaths over months or years to identify vulnerabilities and craft corruption strategies specifically tailored to each target. The corruption process rarely involves direct assault. Instead, entities work gradually, introducing subtle influences during the astropath's routine communications. A demon might plant suggestions that feel like the astropath's own intuition, encouraging small compromises that seem reasonable at the time. It might offer assistance during difficult transmissions, providing psychic strength that allows the astropath to complete communications they would otherwise fail. The help comes without obvious cost initially, but each acceptance creates a small connection that the entity exploits for deeper influence. Over time, the astropath grows dependent on this assistance, unable to perform their duties effectively without the demon's support. By the time they recognize the trap, corruption has progressed too far for easy reversal. Traumatic experiences in the warp accelerate corruption risks dramatically. An astropath who witnesses demonic manifestations, experiences psychic attack that breaches their shields, or suffers severe backlash from warp storms, sustains psychological damage that creates openings for corrupting influence. The trauma weakens mental discipline and erodes the certainty that helps astropaths resist temptation. Entities exploit this vulnerability, appearing as sources of comfort or understanding during the astropath's recovery from traumatic events. They offer explanations that make sense of the horror witnessed, provide techniques for avoiding future trauma, or simply listen with apparent sympathy while the astropath processes their experience. This false comfort establishes rapport that the entity leverages for gradual corruption, transforming the relationship from apparent support into malign control so slowly that the astropath fails to recognize the transition until far too late. Chaos cults operating within the Imperium actively target astropaths for recruitment or corruption. These organizations understand the strategic value of compromised telepaths who can feed false intelligence into Imperial communication networks or provide warnings that allow cult activities to avoid detection. Cult operatives identify astropaths who show signs of isolation, dissatisfaction with their treatment, or psychological vulnerability. They approach carefully, establishing seemingly innocent social contact that gradually develops into deeper relationship. The cultists present themselves as friends who accept the astropath without fear or suspicion, offering the genuine human connection that most telepaths desperately lack. Only after establishing trust do they begin introducing corrupting ideology, framing chaos worship as liberation from the Imperium's oppression rather than damnation. The signs of corruption manifest differently depending on the specific nature of the corrupting influence and how far the process has progressed. Physical mutations represent the most obvious indicator, though these typically appear only in advanced cases. An astropath developing extra digits, skin discoloration, or other abnormal changes faces immediate investigation. More subtle signs prove harder to detect but appear earlier in the corruption process. Changes in behavior patterns, unusual emotional responses, or degradation in work performance all warrant scrutiny. An astropath who begins avoiding colleagues, expressing uncharacteristic opinions about imperial doctrine, or demonstrating increased anxiety around purity tests may be experiencing corrupting influence. Psychic examination reveals corruption more reliably than observation of behavior, as trained examiners can detect the wrongness that accompanies warp taint even when physical and behavioral signs remain minimal. The Ordo Malleus maintains constant vigilance against corrupted astropaths, recognizing the catastrophic damage such individuals could inflict. Inquisitors specializing in demonic threats include astropath corruption among their primary concerns, dedicating resources to monitoring the Adeptus Astra Telepathica's personnel for signs of compromise. They maintain networks of informants within astropathic stations and other facilities where telepaths serve, individuals who observe the astropath's behavior and report anything suspicious. The Inquisition also conducts random audits of astropathic communications, examining message logs and transmission records for patterns that might indicate corrupted astropaths feeding false intelligence into imperial networks. When evidence suggests possible corruption, Inquisitors move decisively, detaining the suspect for intensive examination regardless of their protests or the disruption to communication operations. Internal watchdog organizations within the Adeptus Astra Telepathica provide additional security layers. The Telepathica maintains its own investigative branches, staffed by senior astropaths and sanctioned psykers trained in detecting corruption. These investigators conduct regular inspections of astropathic facilities, interview personnel, and perform psychic examinations of astropaths serving in the field. Their authority extends to all Telepathica operations, allowing them to access any facility and question any individual regardless of rank or assignment. The investigators answer only to the master of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica and the Inquisition, operating independently of normal command structures to prevent corrupted officials from interfering with their work. Their presence creates an atmosphere of constant surveillance that some astropaths find oppressive, but the Telepathica accepts this discomfort as necessary cost for maintaining the communication network's integrity. Regular purity tests form standard procedure for all astropaths throughout their service. These examinations occur at scheduled intervals, typically annually for astropaths in stable postings, and more frequently for those serving in high-risk environments or showing any concerning indicators. The tests involve both psychic and physical components. Sanctioned psykers probe the subject's mind, searching for the distinctive wrongness that accompanies warp corruption. They examine memories for inconsistencies that might indicate demonic influence or cult indoctrination. Physical examinations check for mutations, stigmata, or other signs of chaos taint. The subject must demonstrate their psychic abilities under controlled conditions, allowing examiners to verify that their powers function normally without corrupted augmentation. Blood samples undergo analysis using techniques developed over millennia specifically for detecting warp corruption at the biological level. The Sisters of Silence provide crucial support at major astropathic facilities, their presence offering protection against psychic threats that conventional security cannot address. These Null Maidens possess the pariah gene, a rare mutation that creates a psychic void around them. Their presence disrupts psychic powers and causes profound discomfort to psykers, making them uniquely suited for containing corrupted astropaths or responding to demonic manifestations within telepathica facilities. Major installations typically host small detachments of sisters who maintain constant readiness to respond to psychic emergencies. Their quarters occupy positions that allow rapid deployment to any section of the facility, and they conduct regular patrols through areas where astropaths work. The sisters' presence provides reassurance to facility administrators while creating tension with the astropaths themselves, who find the null maiden's psychic void deeply disturbing despite understanding its protective purpose. Sanctioned executions of compromised astropaths follow established protocols designed to prevent any possibility of demonic manifestation or posthumous corruption. When investigation confirms that an astropath has fallen to chaos, the sentence is always death. No possibility exists for redemption or rehabilitation once corruption reaches detectable levels. The execution occurs as quickly as possible after confirmation, minimizing the time during which the corrupted astropath might cause additional damage. The method varies based on available resources and the specific nature of the corruption, but typically involves psychic nullification followed by immediate physical destruction. Sisters of Silence suppress the condemned astropath's powers completely, preventing any attempt to resist or summon demonic aid. Executioners then kill the astropath using methods that ensure complete destruction of the body, usually incineration at temperatures sufficient to reduce flesh and bone to ash. The remains undergo further consecration and disposal according to rites designed to prevent any fragment from serving as gateway for demonic presence. The facilities where astropaths work incorporate extensive psychic protections designed to suppress demonic threats and limit the damage corrupted individuals can inflict. Hexagrammic wards cover walls, floors, and ceilings of astropathic chambers, their complex geometries disrupting demonic manifestation attempts. These wards require regular maintenance by specialists trained in their construction and empowerment, as the symbols gradually lose potency through exposure to constant psychic activity. Psychically resonant materials in the facility's construction create environments that favor controlled psychic work while hindering hostile manifestations. Blessed oils anoint doorways and thresholds, creating barriers that demons find difficult to cross. Holy relics occupy positions throughout major installations, their presence providing spiritual protection that complements the technical wards and physical barriers. The constant psychic strain inherent in astropathic work causes inevitable degradation of mental faculties over time. Even astropaths who avoid corruption and survive the physical dangers of their service experience gradual deterioration as decades of warp exposure accumulate. The process manifests in various ways depending on individual factors and the specific nature of their duties. Memory becomes unreliable, with astropaths struggling to recall recent events while retaining clear recollection of distant past. Concentration grows difficult, requiring greater effort to achieve and maintain the trance states necessary for communication. Psychic perception loses clarity, the sharp witch sight of youth gradually clouding until the astropath perceives the world through an increasingly distorted lens. Emotional regulation fails, leading to mood swings, inappropriate responses to situations, or complete emotional numbness as the capacity for feeling erodes. The degradation accelerates for astropaths serving in particularly demanding roles. Those who regularly push their abilities to maximum range, who work in regions of unstable warp conditions, or who experience repeated psychic attacks accumulate damage faster than colleagues in safer postings. Military astropaths serving in active combat zones often burn out within a decade, their minds unable to withstand the combination of constant stress, regular trauma exposure, and the intense psychic work that battlefield communications demand. Even astropaths in comfortable administrative postings eventually succumb to accumulated strain, though their decline typically spans decades rather than years. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica monitors its personnel for signs of degradation, conducting regular capability assessments that track each astropath's performance over time. When degradation reaches levels that compromise an astropath's reliability, the Telepathica faces difficult decisions about the individual's continued service. Astropaths showing significant decline, but retaining some capability, might receive reassignment to less demanding roles, where their diminished abilities remain useful. A telepath who can no longer maintain long-range transmissions might still function adequately in local communications or administrative support positions. Those whose degradation progresses beyond any useful capacity face retirement from active service, though the Imperium's gratitude for their years of sacrifice rarely translates into comfortable retirement conditions. Many retired astropaths end their days in Telepathica hospice facilities, institutions that provide basic care while the former telepaths await death. The facilities offer little beyond shelter and minimal medical attention, their sparse conditions reflecting the Imperium's pragmatic approach to individuals who no longer serve productive functions. Some astropaths resist reassignment or retirement, insisting they remain capable of performing their duties despite obvious decline. Pride, fear of purposelessness, or simple denial drives these individuals to conceal their deteriorating condition from superiors. They employ various strategies to mask their failing abilities, relying on experience and memorized responses to compensate for lost capability. Colleagues sometimes enable this deception through misplaced loyalty or sympathy, covering for the declining astropath's mistakes and supporting their continued service. Such situations create serious risks, as communications failures caused by impaired astropaths can have catastrophic consequences. The Telepathica's monitoring systems eventually detect most cases of hidden decline, though the detection sometimes comes only after the compromised astropath has caused significant damage through garbled transmissions or missed messages. The most dedicated astropaths, those whose service spans decades and whose capabilities remain strong despite accumulated years, sometimes receive offers to join the Astronomic Inquirer as their final contribution to the Imperium. This posting represents both honor and death sentence, as choir service inevitably proves fatal within months. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica presents the opportunity as the highest form of service, direct support for the Emperor's great beacon that guides humanity through the darkness. Astropaths who accept understand they volunteer for death, but many choose this end over gradual decline into uselessness. They view choir service as meaningful conclusion to lives spent in the Emperor's service, their final sacrifice ensuring the Astronomicon continues burning and Imperial ships navigate safely through the warp. The transition to choir service follows established procedures designed to maximize each psyker's contribution while maintaining the beacon's stability. Volunteers undergo final medical evaluation to confirm they possess sufficient strength for choir work, as the weakest candidates provide inadequate psychic fuel and die too quickly to justify the logistics of their installation. Those cleared for service travel to the Astronomicon facility adjacent to the Forbidden Fortress, where they receive brief orientation about what awaits them. The orientation provides no comfort, honestly describing the slow death by psychic drainage that choir members experience. The volunteers then proceed to the vast amphitheater where the choir sits, taking their place among the thousands of other psykers whose life force feeds the beacon. Servitors connect them to the life support systems and psychic machinery that will sustain their bodies while draining their essence. The process begins immediately, the new choir members' psychic energy flowing into the Astronomicon as they join the unified consciousness that maintains the Emperor's light in the warp. A small number of exceptional astropaths achieve promotion to senior positions within the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, their decades of successful service and demonstrated capability earning them administrative authority over other telepaths. These individuals transition from active communication work to management roles, overseeing astropathic stations, coordinating training programs, or serving in the Telepathica's bureaucratic apparatus. The promotion offers escape from the constant psychic strain of active service, though the administrative responsibilities bring their own stresses. Senior astropaths must balance operational demands against available personnel, make difficult decisions about assignments and retirements, and maintain the communication network's functionality despite chronic resource shortages and the endless challenges that plague all Imperial institutions. Their experience as working astropaths provides valuable perspective that purely administrative officials lack, allowing them to make informed decisions about operational matters and maintain realistic expectations about what their subordinates can accomplish. The career of a typical astropath spans approximately 20 to 30 years of active service, though individual variation creates wide range around this average. Some die within their first year, killed by the dangers inherent to their work, or succumbing to complications from soul binding that manifest only after assignment to the field. Others serve for 50 years or more, their exceptional resilience and perhaps simple luck allowing them to avoid the hazards and resist the degradation that claims most of their colleagues. The majority fall somewhere between these extremes, serving faithfully for decades until age, accumulated damage, or simple exhaustion forces their retirement or death. Throughout their service, they maintain the communication network that binds the Imperium together, their sacrifice enabling humanity's continued resistance against the countless threats that seek its destruction. The Imperium offers little recognition for this service, beyond the abstract gratitude expressed in official doctrine. Astropaths receive no medals, no public celebrations of their achievements, no monuments commemorating their sacrifice. They work in obscurity, their contributions known only to the small number of officials who directly depend on their services. When they die, whether from violence, psychic burnout, or simple age, their passing goes largely unnoticed beyond the immediate disruption to communication operations. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica records their death in administrative logs, assigns replacements to fill vacated positions, and continues operations without pause for mourning or reflection. This institutional indifference reflects the Imperium's brutal pragmatism, its focus on function over sentiment, and its acceptance that individual lives matter only insofar as they serve the greater whole. Yet the astropaths themselves rarely express resentment about their treatment or their fate. The soul binding fundamentally changes their perspective, creating connection to something greater than individual existence. They understand their role in the Imperium's survival, recognize that their service enables humanity's continued resistance against chaos and Xeno's threats, and find meaning in this contribution, regardless of personal cost. Many develop genuine faith in the Emperor, their direct experience of his presence during soul binding, transforming abstract religious doctrine into concrete certainty. This faith sustains them through isolation, danger, and the slow degradation that claims their minds and bodies. They accept their suffering as necessary sacrifice, their pain and eventual death as small prices for serving the master of mankind and protecting the species he fought to preserve. The eternal vigil continues without end, generation after generation of astropaths taking up the burden as their predecessors fall. The black ships collect new psykers from across the Imperium, the Scholastica Psychana trains them in astropathic arts, and the soul-binding ritual transforms them into the blind seers who maintain humanity's fragile communication network. They disperse to posts throughout Imperial space, taking their places in the vast apparatus that coordinates governance, military operations, and the countless other functions required for the Imperium's continued existence. They work until death or incapacity claims them, their service measured in decades of faithful duty rather than glory or recognition. And when they fall, others rise to replace them, the cycle perpetuating itself as it has for 10,000 years and will continue for as long as the Imperium endures and the Emperor watches over humanity from his golden throne.